From a transmitter atop Great Blue Hill, this is WGBH, live, local talk, Boston Public Radio.
Hey, Eastern Brady. I am Marjorie Egan. You're listening to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio, 89.7 WGBH. Hello again, Jim.
My hair's still sticking out?
Hair's looking good, Jim.
Okay, fine. So earlier this month, 47 Democrats in the House of Representatives defied a White House veto threat by backing a GOP bill to ramp up screening requirements for Syrian and Iraqi refugees. Congressman Stephen Lynch from Boston was among them. He joins us to talk about the reasoning behind his vote, in addition to other congressional matters. Congressman Lynch, thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Jim. Good morning, Marjorie.
Good morning, Congressman. Thank you so much for being with us. So let's start with the vote on the Syrian refugees. Why were you with those 47 other Democrats?
Well, it's a very simple bill. I know that it's got subsumed within a larger discussion around immigration policy, but basically the bill we voted on was a very short bill, 4 pages in length, basically, and it said that the Director of National Security shall review the vetting process that's being conducted by both the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. And because of the disastrous results we've had so far with the screening process, especially with the Department of Homeland Security, I think it was a very good idea to have another set of eyeballs looking at that process. Back in August, we did an investigation, the Inspector General did, of Department of Homeland Security, and they had 72 individuals who were on the terrorist watch list that were actually working at the Department of Homeland Security. So obviously the director had to resign because of that. And then we went further and did an 8-airport investigation. We had staffers go into 8 different airports to test the Department of Homeland Security screening process at major airports, and they had a 95% failure rate. So we had folks. This was a testing exercise, but folks going in there with guns on their ankles and other weapons on their persons, and there was a 95% failure rate. So I have very, very low confidence based on empirical data that we've got on Department of Homeland Security. So I think we desperately need another set of eyeballs looking at the vetting process. And that's vetting that's being done, in the latter case at major airports where we have, a stationary person coming through a facility, and we're failing 95% of the time. And I just have even lower confidence that they can conduct the vetting process in places like Amman, Jordan, or Khalis on the Syrian border, or in Cairo, or in Beirut, in any better fashion, especially given the huge volume of applicants that we've had now, seeking refugee status.
We're talking to Steve Lynch, Congressman, obviously, from South Boston. Congressman, though, the criticism, and I share in this, I don't want to say it's somebody else, is that even if you're right that there was a problem that needed fixing, or at least the system needed strengthening, the most likely way that a terrorist would come into this country is not through an 18 to 24 month, even if it's flawed, process, but through this program that allows 20 million people from 38 countries to come here every single year with absolutely no prior approval.
Oh yeah,
at all.
We've got to do that too, Jim.
But my sense was that it was an effort. It was Republican sponsors, but you voted for this too, Congressman. It was essentially a show effort in some ways, because the more serious problem, and I assume you would agree it's the more serious problem, the more likely entry vehicle, was left to another day. No?
No. Listen, we had Democratic and Republican proposals on this bill, and there wasn't a dime's worth of difference between the two of them. And yeah, it became sort of a proxy battle over immigration. You had a bunch of Republican governors that were saying, that were using it politically and saying we're going to stop refugees from coming into our state, which is baloney, because they have zero ability under the Constitution to actually prevent refugees from coming into their state, number one. number two, you had other people on the far left saying this is going to stop every person from coming into the United States. And in both cases, if they only took the time to read the bill, they would see that it did not do either. And the Democratic proposal also requires a multi-layered vetting process of refugees. And the reason the refugee issue came up and not the visa waiver program is because in the Paris example, you had somebody go into the stream of legitimate refugees and then perpetrate acts of violence upon, the civilians in Paris. That's why that example came to the forefront. And I agree with you. I think that the visa waiver program, where you've got, 20 million people coming in versus what you've got coming in, 10,000 perhaps at the end of the day on the refugee program. Obviously the visa waiver program is the one that we should be looking at.
Congressman, you mentioned the governors who, I don't know if you used the word grandstanding, but whatever pejorative description you used, because they didn't have the power to do anything. Charlie Baker was one of those governors. He did not sign the letter that Republican governors sent to the president, but he did state that he wanted a pause on the whole refugee thing. Was he grandstanding in your opinion?
No, I don't think he was. And if you listen to his press conference and when he addressed it, I thought his remarks were very thoughtful, and I thought his remarks were very measured, comparing to what you heard from some of the red state governors, that were doing a lot of chest bumping and that sort of thing. But and I also think that, Governor Baker was asking for more information, which I think was totally appropriate.
Congressman, you just talked about the terrible record of TSA and people getting all these weapons in and contraband in. And here we are, Americans, counting on the TSA to keep us relatively safe while we're flying. You talked about having low confidence in the Department of Homeland Security. So why should we feel as if we have someone looking out for us? I mean, or should we is it sort of every man for himself every time you get in an airplane?
No, I think that the resources are being spent. I think there are a bunch of different weaknesses in our system. I think we have very low-paid TSA workers and Department of Homeland Security workers. I think there's a huge turnover there. When you talk to the people at the airport that are actually working there, when Bush created this system, I think it was 700,000 employees. He basically stripped away their right to join a union, and they've tried to use low-wage employees there. There's very little. I heard from a TSA employee last week who's leaving, and he said there's just no room for advancement there. You're stuck, and so I think morale is part of it, and the whole screening process is being revisited now after the Inspector General's report.
But I guess what I'm saying, if Homeland Security is so inept, but we're depending on Homeland Security for our security, maybe we should be much more scared than we are. You like to think, I think a lot of Americans after Paris were thinking, well, this is horrible, but you learned about how there was no communication between Brussels and in Paris, and there was a lot of ineptitude, political ineptitude, and you got like to think, well...
It was an open border, too.
Yeah, a lot of other situations, but you like to think, for example, that the New York City police, and they're not part of Homeland Security, I understand that, but the cops are on top of things, but maybe there should be some urgency about making sure that the Homeland Security people that are supposed to be keeping us secure are doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in that. They told me, we had a hearing maybe 3 weeks ago where the new TSA director said that they're going back to basically going back to the drawing board and beginning again in terms of what their approach is. So that's a good thing. It's a little bit late in coming, but I think because of what's happened in Paris and what happened in Egypt with the airliner, what happened in Beirut, I think it's back on everybody's screen now, and we're redoubling our efforts. But obviously, I think the system that was initially put in place was inadequate.
Congressman Lynch, one last refugee question. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know if this has happened yet. I know in mid-November I'd read that you were planned to visit a refugee camp. As we know, Ben Carson has visited and said they're really happy there. They'd love to stay there. They have, or whatever other foolishness. Have you gone yet, or are you planning on going?
Yeah, I've gone to a few of them.
And what are the conditions like?
Well, they vary. and bear in mind, 2/3 of the refugees in Turkey, for example, which is the biggest host country because of its proximity to Syria,
Yeah.
2/3 of them are outside of the camps. I visited Adana, which is a big camp. I know there might be 100,000 refugees there, which is one of the better constructed ones. But you can see, that there. I think the vast majority of refugees there are kids and women. And I think that they're, they as refugee camps go, it's probably state of the art. They have clinics there and schools, things like that. But it is a refugee camp, and you don't want people living there for extended periods of time, which might be the case given the circumstances in Syria. I think Dr. Carson was right when you ask those people what's Plan A. A lot of them are waiting to go back. They have homes, they have businesses, they have, some of them are professionals. They want to go back. Their kids are in school there, normally. They want to go back to Syria. But when you ask them what Plan B is, they usually say either Germany. Most of them say Germany, the vast majority, and some say France as well. But to Germany because of the generous health benefits, and also there are long-established communities there in places like Hamburg and Dusseldorf where Syrian families have lived for years and are well established and accepted. So, and none of them that I met, said we want to go to the United States. Although in a pinch, I'm sure they would take that option.
Why? Because it's so far away from home?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think there are closer communities, more traditional communities where they would feel more welcome.
Inside, just a breaking news story. In the wake of the release a year after the killing of Laquan McDonald in Chicago, the mayor, Rahm Emanuel, who may be in trouble himself, has announced that the chief of police has been fired. That happened about an hour ago. Congressman Lynch, staying on Syria for a second, you know better than we, the Pentagon is now recommending that what was originally 50 special ops forces now be increased in Syria, American special ops forces. Do you support this, and do you worry about